welcome. Welcome to this public meeting. Oh, we're waiting for Susan. I'll start. She'll walk. Welcome to this public meeting of the Princeton Board of Education. Our mission is to prepare all of our students to lead lives of joy and purpose as knowledgeable, creative, and compassionate citizens of a global society. The board is an elected, unpaid group of 10 citizens who set policy and make decisions on educational, financial, and personnel matters for the Princeton Public Schools on behalf of all residents. We are always pleased when members of the community attend our meetings. The board and school district operate under applicable New Jersey laws and under regulations of the New Jersey State Board of Education. Each meeting includes an opportunity for those attending to comment on items on the published agenda or other matters of interest to them. The board reserves the right to limit the time allotted to public participation. Law limits discussion of individual personnel and confidential matters. We desire that our meetings provide useful opportunity for communication between the board and the community. Thank you for attending. I'll ask our corporate secretary to read the notices.
Thank you. As required under the Open Public Meeting Act, NJSA 1046 et sequentia, adequate notice was given for calling this meeting. It was authorized by the Board of Education and forwarded to the municipal clerk, Princeton Packet, and the Times on January 9th, 2020, and distributed to the schools and others on the standard distribution list. The board reserves the right to enter into executive session during all meetings of the Board of Education. Board Policy 2230, recording devices, requires that we inform those attending this meeting that the proceedings are being recorded on video. This meeting is being video recorded. It is not being live streamed. No action will be taken at this meeting.
Thank you. Would you like to call the roll?
Yes. Beth Barrand.
Here.
Michelle Tuck-Ponder.
Present.
Betsy Calver-Baglio.
Here.
Debbie Bronfeld.
Here.
Dan Dart.
Here.
Jess Deutsch.
Here.
Susan Cantor.
Here.
Daphne Kendall.
Here.
Brian McDonald.
Present.
Peter Katz.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. I will say welcome again to our budget workshop for 2020. We're very happy to see all of you here tonight, and I think you'll have a very, I'm very excited to hear Matt's presentation tonight. It's a very good overview of our financial situation. Before we get started, Michelle, did you have a comment?
I do. Good evening, everyone. I'm Michelle Tuck-Ponder, and I am currently the chair of the Labor Negotiations Committee of the Princeton Public Schools. At our previous meeting, we had members from PREA come and address the board about representation during the negotiation hearings, and they suggested that they thought that we should not spend district money on having an attorney represent the board, and that they would also be willing to negotiate without having professional representation from New Jersey Education Association. And while we have nothing but the highest respect for our teachers and educators in the district, and while we are looking forward to productive and amicable negotiations, our real issue or our real challenge is to ensure that we have the highest level of competency as we enter into these negotiations, because it's really about what the district and the taxpayers can afford from our side of the table, and treating our teachers as best we can and as fair as we can. So while we understand that PREA has the option of being represented by someone from their union, their state union, or council if they choose, an NJEA negotiator, we have elected to be represented by a labor attorney who has a very high level of expertise in negotiating public school contracts. And so while we are restricted from having really any kind of public discussion around negotiations, and while this will be the final comment that we make about negotiations, we thought it was important to respond directly to some of the comments and suggestions made by our teachers at our previous meeting.
Thank you. So before we get started, Matt, just to be clear what's happening tonight so everyone understands the process, this is a workshop meeting. It's not kind of a typical meeting that we normally do. I think we will have first a presentation by you on the finances.
So we actually didn't discuss this,
Yes.
but we could certainly have open dialogue amongst the board as we go if
Yes.
people have question. We have a section at the end for the public
Okay,
to,
good.
of course, comment and ask questions. It's probably not, wouldn't work well to have each public member come up in the middle of the presentation.
Okay.
So that's how I envision it. Are we
Thank
all
you.
kind of on the same?
Yeah, so you'll present to
It's
the
a
board.
working meeting for the board and
We will work
administration.
on the thing, and then at the end, there will be time for public comment. It's 7:30, so we hopefully will be out of here, well, we're aiming to be an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours.
As you guys know, I'm not terribly long-winded, so
Okay, just want to give people a sense of the flow for the evening, so thank you
Excellent.
for your patience in listening to us as we do our work, and then there will be opportunity at the end for public comment. Okay?
Great.
Can I just say one word before we get started? The budget is an expression of our values, and obviously the development of the budget has a direct impact on the lives and the learning of our students, which is why all of us are here. And the process by which we talk about and develop the budget is also an expression of our values, and we want very much to be as open and transparent in the development of that budget as we can be, which is why we've actually begun the process earlier this year, and there will be future meetings. So this discussion is really to give, as Beth mentioned, a sort of high-level understanding of our finances, past, current, and prospective. And that context, that picture of our finances will then set the stage for the development of our 2020-2021 budget, which we will be talking about in greater detail during the month of March.
As you get further information.
Yes, and you'll see that as Matt presents. He'll talk about the shift in our budget process, and he'll talk about the dates, the information that we'll be getting the end of this month that will impact the formation of our budget and how we're going to move forward. So with that,
great. Thanks
let's
for
get started.
Thank you for setting me up on that. So welcome to the 2021, the first budget workshop of the budget season. I love this. As I keep saying, people laugh at me, especially the administrators.
Should we turn down
Anyway.
the lights? Would it work better?
It will help. So it still may be difficult for you guys to see in the back. This will be posted to the website under the budget section probably early tomorrow. So we start out, the mission of the Princeton Public Schools is to prepare all of our students to lead lives of joy and purpose as knowledgeable, creative, and compassionate citizens of a global society. Strategic planning goals. So these are our planning goals that go through, actually this is the last budget cycle, the 2021 that we're starting to work on right now. We will be beginning a new strategic planning process sometime late this fiscal year. But our overarching goals are equity, as you've heard us discuss at many board meetings. I believe there was an equity meeting last night. Ensuring every child achieves their highest potential by removing barriers and providing supports. In my short time here, I've been very impressed with the dedication of this school district and board towards that goal. So the real brief outline, mission statement we went over, priority-based budgeting overview we'll discuss, the budget calendar, school tax overview / tax impact, our operating budget, and at the end we'll take questions from the public. So priority-based budgeting is something that we are initiating this year. Like the budget itself, it's a continuing multi-year process. The underlying philosophy of priority-based budgeting is about how a government / school district, us, should invest resources to meet its stated objectives. It helps us to better articulate why the services we offer exist, what price we pay for them, and consequently what value they offer citizens. Some of the most pertinent principles associated with this philosophy of priority-based budgeting are, I did footnote this, I didn't create this, we took this from an article put out by the GFOA. Prioritize our services. Priority-based budgeting evaluates the relative importance of individual programs and services rather than entire departments. It is distinguished by prioritizing the services a school district provides one versus another. An example would be choosing more professional development, which would support equity, one of our strategic goals. We wish to break down the organizational silos when we do this. So priority-based budgeting strives to do the important things well. Priority-based budgeting identifies the services that offer the highest value and continues to provide funding for them, while reducing service levels, divesting, or potentially eliminating lower value services. A little tough for a school district. We pretty much have to do most of the services, but really the focus here is one of the things that priority-based budgeting and strategic budgeting works on is developing a mechanism, return of academic, it's ROI, return of academic, return on investment. So over time, the new initiatives that we undertake, we wish to be able to quantify the success of those over time, and then put more resources into the ones that have shown success, and then put less resources into those that don't show as much success. So another really important part to me is being new here, so it's very easy to take my past perspectives or to question past patterns of spending. An incremental budget process does not seriously question the spending decisions made in years past. Priority-based budgeting puts all the money on the table to encourage more creative conversations about the services we provide. The last one, you can probably see highlighted. I have something important highlighted. Spend within the organization's means. Priority-based budgeting starts with the revenue available to the school district, rather than last year's expenditures as the basis for decision-making. Quite often in school districts and government in general, we appropriate a 2% or 1.5% or some kind of increase off the previous base. One of the things that I've learned to do, this will be my 6th budget I've worked on for a school district, is to start with the actual estimated revenues that we have. You'll see later on, when we get near the end, we have fairly certain, there are a few uncertainties in our revenue side, but generally speaking, because the vast majority comes from the tax base, I always say about 98, 99, more than 99% of those revenues are known. So we try to balance to the estimated revenues. We'll also talk a little bit later about some of the confusion that the state of New Jersey likes to throw at us about budgeting fund balance and how that can kind of sometimes skew the budget and make it difficult to accurately assess where we are. So the budget calendar, October, November, we were planning more at the central office level and the board level. By November 15th, I had individual budget managers. I shared, the business office shared with all the budget managers spreadsheets, online access to spreadsheets, so we could see what they're putting in. They submitted them by mid-December to us with their budget requests and more detail than had been required in past budgets. And then we've been working on them since then. Now we're presenting our first top-level discussion about the budget process and how we're doing things. There's no official announcement. Last year, Governor Murphy, I think, pushed it to the first week in March, so there's some flexibility with, but typically it's the last Tuesday in February when the governor gives his budget address. So within that budget address, there's everything related to the DOE. And then after that, they're statutorily required to release state aid numbers. So, we don't get a lot of state aid, so it generally won't have a huge impact on our budget. But then when we have those numbers, we're able to start to complete the budget. We're looking to have a second tentative budget workshop, either March 4th or March 10th. We haven't decided yet. I'm leaning towards March 10th to give me a little more time. Us a little more time, I should say. March 17th is our tentative budget adoption. That's our Tuesday, March 17th, at a regular board meeting. That Friday, the budgets are due to the state. And then April 28th is our mandatory public budget hearing and final budget adoption. So the pie chart here represents the Princeton's 2019 property tax breakout. As typical in New Jersey, the school districts have the biggest share of the tax levy. The municipal is just under a quarter. The county, as also typical, is a little bigger than the municipal, and then you have a small slice going to open space. This was taken from the 2019 Princeton budget newsletter. So the 2019-2020 school tax. So most of what I'll be talking about tonight talks about the general fund levy and the smaller debt service levy. So those two combined to have the school tax levy. So the general fund levy was 78.24 million. As you can see by the pie chart, it's basically 93% of the overall tax levy. With the newer referendum, that debt service piece has increased. The referendum process is an excellent way for school districts to maintain and fix capital projects such as roofs, HVAC, heating, cooling, additions on buildings. All those things are funded through state aid. We get, so as long as the DOE approves those projects, we get back up to 36 cents on the dollar. So if we did a referendum where everything was approved, so sometimes things like fields or a field house, they'll kind of exclude. You won't get that money back from the DOE, but it's a great way for a district like us to be able to get back money on capital improvements. So calculating the fiscal year, so right now we're in fiscal year 2020. So this slide is trying to show people how the tax levy kind of splits over 2 years with the town being on a calendar basis, the school districts on a fiscal June 30 basis. So our fiscal school tax levy gets broken up in the town tax bill that you see as taxpayers in two separate pieces. So part of what you paid towards the school district was the leftover piece from in 2020 was the leftover piece from the 19 and part of the 1920 school tax levy. So the equals the calendar tax levy at the bottom. So the current fiscal school tax levy, as we showed before, was 83.99 million. The calendar 2019 tax levy is 82.7 million. So the tax increase increased from 1.12 to 1.151 in calendar 2019 per $100 of assessed property value. Basically, and then we have to factor in the ratables. So the ratables have been going up here. They tend to be cyclical and follow the general economy. So we've seen a little slowing in that area. But when the ratables go up, the effective tax rate goes down. So with the 3.4% calendar year school tax levy, it was effectively felt to the average taxpayers 2.8% across the school tax base. So ratable is the property valued within the town. Homes, businesses have assessed value. There are school districts are non-assessed. There are nonprofits that are non-assessed. But the total cumulative assessed value of all the property in the town is $7.183 billion as of 2019. So the ratables are very, very high here in Princeton overall, which helps our bond rating. So we have a AAA bond rating, which is great. That means that when we do have bonds issued, we pay a lower interest rate, all else being equal. So the higher the credit quality, obviously, the lower the interest rate. So our budget philosophy. So consistent with Princeton Public Schools' mission, our goal with respect to the budget and operations is to ensure that our children here thrive and realize their full potential while also carefully stewarding taxpayer resources by developing fiscally responsible budgets, operating our schools as efficiently as possible, and properly maintaining our facilities. So one of the things I've been talking about a lot in my first 5 months here is about our goal here as a school district isn't to make money, to accumulate fund balance. We want to strike a fund balance, which is essentially our reserves or our cash in the bank. It's a simple, accounting-wise, assets less liabilities. If it were a business, that's what it would be equal to. But we want to break even each year. We want to spend as much of our money as possible on the students. That's really what we're about here. We're about education, so we want to have, we don't want to make money. We're not a business. So I described fund balance. So down below, the last piece I alluded to earlier was talking about, so the New Jersey DOE requires school districts. They have an idea of what our fund balance is supposed to be, and they require us to budget basically the excess above 2% of that fund balance. Now, other school districts across the country, it's significantly higher. So if you think about our budget, so that's 2% of our operating budget. So right about, being at about a $90 million school budget. So that would mean that the state says we should only have $1.8 million set aside for items such as, something, if a roof collapsed, let's say, which would be terrible, no one would be in the building, but something like that, a major capital emergency that came up. So those are those reserves. So 2% isn't a lot. So that's when we say we have a balanced budget. So it's balancing the budget with that surplus or fund balance. But the intent is not to spend that every year. If we actually spent the required budgeted fund balance over time, if we spent that, we would go down very quickly, and then we would have almost no fund balance. So it's a fine line there where we want to have a reasonable fund balance, and then our goal is to break even every year. If we go, 250, 300,000 over 1 year, then 250,000 under 1 year, that's kind of where my target is for a district this size. It's not always the easiest thing to manage that exactly, but over time, we want to go up and down just, as close as we can to break even, spending our dollars most efficiently as possible on our students. So part of what I've been tasked with and really been working hard on is creating a forward-looking, historical-based budget process. So knowing where we've been to more accurately predict how we can get to the future. So you don't know, if you don't know where you've been, you can't get there. It's very important. So I've developed a 5-year look back on the model, and we're looking out every 3 years. So it's obviously we have less clarity going forward than we have going backwards. So we can't create a sustainable budget without first analyzing where we were in the past. One of the most important aspects of the school district's budget, and I'm sure the board members have heard me talk about this a lot already, are recurring expenses and recurring revenues. So a recurring expense is simply an expense that occurs every year. So when we hire a new employee, we have to make sure that our recurring revenues will be able to fund that recurring expense. It's very important. The vast majority of our budget here in Princeton is funded by local taxpayers. In order to more accurately analyze our budget, it's best to analyze actual revenues and expenditures. So I'm going to focus on looking at our most recent audited actual numbers. We're going to start there, fiscal 19, which ended this past June 30th. And we'll talk a little bit about estimated fiscal 20, our current budget, and then we'll move forward to the first top level discussion of where we expect our fiscal 2021 budget to look like. So these are our actual 2019 revenues. In the dark blue, at 85% is our tax levy. State aid is that lime green, 7%. Cranberry tuition is the next largest at 6%. And then we're left with that little 2%. So it's kind of where I come up with the 98%, 99% number of known revenues I was talking about before. Did I miss one? Nope, thought I missed one. So this is what I was alluding to before about looking backwards. So we started with the baseline 2015. We're looking at our revenue tracking over time. So we had a little bit of a windfall you'll see highlighted there this year. So we had a very favorable extraordinary aid number, which is significantly higher than the previous 4 years. It was about a little over $1 million higher than kind of what we've averaged over the past. So the extraordinary aid numbers is one of those numbers that is unpredictable, as I was talking about before. So there's a couple of things with that. The state of New Jersey has not been able to, to fully fund education within their own formula that was set up about 13, 14 years ago. So extraordinary aid is simply special ed costs through a formulaic submission each year. We do this, it's usually due right around Memorial Day, and then they prorate the percentage. So it was all the way down to 50% for fiscal 18, statewide, so it's prorated statewide at a percentage. It did jump up 12% to a little over 56% in 2019, and we're able to get a little bit extra cost there.
Matt, before you go ahead, I just have a question. On the extraordinary aid, a couple things. It was said it was a $1.7 million, windfall. But really, year over year, and I know you weren't here when this budget was done last year, but year over year is 1.1 million. So I guess my question is, why do you think extraordinary aid was under budgeted for 1920?
So there's a few questions there. So
And I
when we
have
talk
another one,
about, so typically school districts, because it's actually a very good question. So one of the issues ties into what I was talking about was forced budgeting of fund balance, right?
Mhm.
So one of the things is, so we budgeted it, typically we budgeted, it was just over 700, and it was 752 this year. It was 750,000 that year. So you're comparing what was actually received versus the budgeted number. However, because we're forced to budget this year about $2.3 million of fund balance, so BAs will quite commonly under budget the extraordinary aid number, because so you don't want to spend all that budgeted fund balance, like I was saying before. So it's just a little way to make the budget a little more manageable. So in this case, if we typically expected, we got about 1.3 to 1.4 a year, right, over that time period. So if we had budgeted 750, and then we expected to make up, so you essentially make up, you have a positive budget variance on that line item. So you've then, if you had to budget $2 million, you've already made up, about 700,000 on average. It was a little bit of a windfall this year, which helped to replenish our fund balance.
And then about the windfall. So this is reimbursement for special education costs the district bears. Yes?
Yes, it's reimbursement for special
Right.
education
So
based on a formula.
Right, it's not a windfall. It was unexpected, but it's really reimbursement for services the district's providing. And
Absolutely.
What would that number be if we were fully funded?
Well, it would be 2.478 divided by 0.56.
4 million.
Thank you. Okay, so
Thank you.
So
Got
really,
my-
it's really just the state fulfilling its obligations. It's not a windfall. Because later on, we're going to get into budget numbers, and we're going to see that special education costs in the district have risen. So I just want to be clear that that's going up. That extraordinary aid number is going up because our special education costs are going up. It's not just the state was like, oh, we like Princeton, we're going to throw them, an extra $1 million. It's really because we're being underfunded in special education. So I just want to be careful, because I've heard, like, in the community, oh, we got a windfall. I don't view it as a windfall. I view it as partial reimbursement for services that we're providing, that we're required to provide under law, and really we're only being compensated 50%. So my question is, for 2021, and maybe you'll get to this later, what are you going to budget?
So I spent a whole weekend, not to brag.
Okay.
Most people don't do this, and I guess I'm bragging. All right, I'm bragging. I spent a whole weekend helping. So one of the things I promised special ed department here was, and I've done this at every school district, was take a more active role and really help. Mickey is
That's
a
great.
lot of things, and she's not an accountant. I think she will freely admit that. So she was happy. So I did spend the time actually calculating what it would be this year. So it's going to be somewhere around $1.75 million
Okay.
for fiscal 20.
And then we can hope that we're
And
gonna
that's
get-
at the 56% proration. We
Right.
don't actually know
Right.
that number ahead of time, so it's one of the areas where there are quite a bit of unknowns.
Well, but Steve Sweeney has said, so he's very
Yes.
a big supporter of special education, and so one of his goals is to eventually fully fund special education. So it is possible that number could go up another 12%. Right?
We are hopeful
We're
that
not going to budget for it, but we're hopeful.
we are hopeful that in the budget address. So last year, it was stated in the budget address that Governor Murphy was going to add, I think it was $125 million he added as a line item across the state. So we didn't know exactly what the percentage would play out to, because each year the submissions across the state in each district are very different. So that was a very good point. Thank you.
Thank you.
So analyzing the 2015 to 2019 revenue. So we talked about the extraordinary aid. So most of the other aid we get are called categorical state aid. There's really kind of two real major kind of classifications of the state aid that school districts get. So school districts that have higher needs get equalization aid, which is just what it's meant, is to try to equalize the funding of school districts across the state. So those that are not able to levy the school taxes enough to fund for, what's viewed as the formula for school spending. So they have equalization aid. We get categorical aid, which is based on our student enrollments in categories such as special education. It's a very small piece of what we actually pay for special education. There's categorical transportation aids. So these have gone up very slightly. We've had a 4-year average growth in our school tax levy of 3.68% from fiscal 15 to 19. Most of that is due to rising enrollments. The effective tax rate, which I described before, over that time period was just over 2% related to the growth in ratables. And this bar chart basically just shows what I just said, the tax levy increase, and then the effective tax increase. It's like my remote control at home. It works when it wants. So this donut chart, which I kind of like these ones. So this talks about those same 4-year periods. So you ask yourself, so we hear about there's a 2% tax cap in the state of New Jersey, but there are certain things that are allowed to be passed through beyond that 2%. Healthcare costs that rise above 2% can be passed through. There is a caveat there, as we'll talk about a little later, that's going to be affecting our 2021 budget. It's indexed to the state school employees' health benefit plan. So if their plan goes up, so if their plan goes up 8%, so you're allowed a 6% waiver based on your actual expenses. But as is the current case, they've had 2 years, and that's on a calendar basis. They've had 2 years of actually very slightly negative increases in health insurance. So for fiscal 21, there is no waiver. But over this period of time, in the past 4 years, we have had $725,000 of healthcare adjustment. We've had significant enrollment adjustment, and the straight 2% tax levy increase was 55% of that. So that's the difference when you hear about 2% tax levy cap, but effectively we can go beyond that based on certain scenarios. So this charts our enrollment, which is in the blue bars, the growth in the last 4 years, 2015 to 2019, and it tracks our tax levy growth analysis, which clearly track each other since most of our revenue here is tax levy. It's based on the October 15th enrollments, which are what the school aid is based on. We count all our students, all districts do in the state, every October 15th. It's actually a little bit of a misnomer because it's finalized in December, but so this chart looks at our Princeton charter school costs. So they were given a waiver to increase their enrollment, as you can see. So what I've taken is the average end of year. That's why you have the decimals for students. They did not chop up their students, I promise you. They took the average final at the end of the year. They actually count them twice for charter schools, at the October 15th count, and then at the end of the year it's audited and they come up with the average enrollment. So it's tracked. We've had significant 2-year significant increases in the tuitions. They actually increased again by about 6% for fiscal '20. So it's definitely a little bit of a weight on our budget.
It's required by the state, right? The last one wasn't for enrollment.
So the charter school calculation is calculated by the state. You know, we're required to pay for those students. It's slightly atypical here in Princeton that with such a high-performing school district, we have charter school. So typically, the charter schools have grown in the communities in the state. The Abbott school districts, which were heavily funded, there was 39 districts back in the 80s that were heavily funded across the state. So typically, the charter schools developed in those communities as competition with the public schools, and essentially, that's what it is. They're funded at a slightly lower percentage, so the average tuition cost at a charter school is slightly lower than our community, but it does reflect over time. It does track with our community. It's targeted at about 90%, and they weight it. So in the fiscal '20 increase of 6%, there was a higher percentage of their students that were English language learners, special that had an IEP. They get a little extra weighting for that. And then free and reduced gets an additional weighting. So that was part of the increase. The current fiscal '20 increase was not based on additional students as the 2018 and 2019 were.
Matt, do you expect when you look at the budget for next year and plan for this cost, do you expect an increase next year?
So right now, I'm focusing on a 3% number. We will get that number. Unfortunately, it comes out very close to the adoption of the tentative budget, which will be March 17th. It's due to the state on the 20th. They usually only get us that number about a week ahead of time. But right now, I'm predicting about 3%. I don't think, but it's a little bit of an unknown. Sometimes the state numbers I've seen in the past district in Hoboken, they had 4 active charter schools, and it was a little bit difficult to predict. They actually got in a bind one year because they hadn't been, so they give you a number, and it was coming under every year. So finally, after 3 years, they budgeted less, and then it went way up. So it's not a perfect science for budgeting purposes.
In the current,
But they've pretty much maxed out.
in the current year, it's at about 6.5 million.
Yeah, it was a 6% increase over that 2019 number. I think we'll see that a little more closely in another chart. So we talked a little bit before about debt service levy and what it pays for. So it's our long-term debt issued to for capital improvements to the schools. We're in the middle of a referendum right now. That's the $26.928 million at the bottom. That debt was issued just over a year ago at very low interest rates. Most of the tranches were at 3%. So we have three bonds outstanding right now. The maturity dates, February 1st, 2022 is in the middle, and February 1st, 2023. So over those 2 years, it's about $5 million. That will be $5 million annually at the end of fiscal '23 for the cumulative of those two debt service issues that will mature. That will be coming off of our budget. I talked about before about the AAA rating allows us to issue debt at a very favorable interest rate. And then on top, we get the money back from the state on capital improvements, which is very helpful. In the past, we've participated in the ROD grants, regular operating district grants for capital improvements. Very
Matt,
Percentage, it's a percentage that we get back from the state.
It is. It's once again, it's a prorated number. It's supposed to be by statute 40%, but it's kind of been prorated to 36%. But at the same time, it's also prorated for what they allow. So the final eligible costs. So the final eligible costs on the referendum determine that percentage. Most things are allowed, but like I said, sometimes certain athletic things are not. Typically, they will fund replacement of turf fields, but they won't fund the implementation of a turf field. On top of that, if you do new building, you get funded at a much lower level because they've kept that number static since, I think, 1999. So then you're dropping way down towards like more, I think, depending on the price of the building, much closer to like 10, 11% of a proration.
So Matt, that middle bond, I think, was originally issued around $85 million and has $12 million left. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, that was a recently refunded. It was a recently refunded. Actually, in the end of 2018, our bond council saw that we had cost savings possible, so we refunded that debt for a savings. The state only allows you to refund debt if it's at a 3% cost savings.
But the original referendum size was?
I don't remember that specific. I'll have to get back to you on
Okay,
that one.
thank you.
At that time, with that referendum, the state reimbursement worked a little differently. I think they got that up front, so the amount of bonds issued was significantly less than the size of the referendum.
I think that was one of what I was referring to about the ROD grants.
Right,
So then they don't give you the money back on the debt, but you get the money up front, and you don't have to bond
right.
for the.
So an
It's a
$85
little
million
cleaner. It's a little
referendum
cleaner.
might have resulted in a $60 million bond issue. Yeah, okay,
I'll get back to you on that, though.
thank you.
You're welcome. So this is a pie chart of our 2019 operating budget, our actual results. How was it spent? How do we spend the money? So the dark blue, the biggest part of the pie is salaries. So its overall salaries are 60%. Benefits are 17%. Charter schools 7%. Tuitions 3%. Mostly special ed tuitions. There's a little bit of vocational costs in that number, but for ease of purposes, we label it special ed. Transportation at about 3%. So once you get beyond, it's 13, was it 30? I calculated before. You're down to about 10%. And the energy costs, we have to turn the lights on every day. We'll talk a little bit more about some of our plans for sustainability improvements going forward. We have to turn the lights on. So then we're down about 9%. That's kind of, so we don't have a lot of discretionary spending after that. So there's little left to work with once we get beyond salaries and benefits. They drive the boat as far as the school district goes. And 77% it's not atypical. It's fairly typical for a school district. Like I said, 77% of our funds were spent on salaries and benefits. The charter school costs were 7% of our budget and had increased 13.95% average over the previous 2 years and 5.9% over the previous 4. So because of their enrollment increase, it went up significantly in fiscal 18 and 19.
So can I ask a question about
You can.
salaries and benefits? Thank you. So it says there, salaries and benefits went up by 4.19%. But on the next page, it shows that salaries actually went down by 0.31%. So I'm just wondering, are you statutorily required to include those two items together?
I think you're saying the next page, this
Yeah.
page you're talking about.
Yep.
So 2 pages ahead. So that's 19 to 20.
Right.
So I'll get there pretty quickly, but so that was related to the reduction in force that the school district went through at the very tail end of fiscal 19, so planning for the fiscal 20 budget. So it's comparing, so
Oh, so you're
before
saying they went down in 2020?
Correct.
And you're going
the
retrospective,
current
you're only
year,
talking about
yes,
2019?
yes.
Okay.
So it was year-over-year growth. So 2019 compared to the prior year of 2018, about 4%, which was a 4-year annual growth percentage increase. Now, we've had significantly rising enrollment, which has driven some of that. And some of the other part is, of course, salary increases. You can see in bright red, or hopefully maybe you can't see it in the back, but this is what I was just referring to. The recognition of the above factors, that was what led to the reduction of force to try to right-size the budget, so to speak. So this is a simple chart that shows what drives the budget here. Salaries, benefits, and our charter school expenditures are correlated with each other. So now we were looking at the current 2020 budget. Where do we estimate we're going to fall? So I pride myself on doing a lot of analysis and trying to predict where we're gonna go. So these are estimated numbers. Salaries are looking to come in slightly under what they were last year based on the reduction in force. So year over year in school districts are also another unpredictable part of the budget. One of the other unpredictable parts is retirements, who retires. So when they retire, generally speaking, not all the time, replaced with a younger, lower cost teacher. So that's a positive thing, or it helps the budget. So the other thing, so one of the things that's driving costs up this year is that, so we've been really flat here, and this is very typical also in school districts. So we've done a great job at maintaining our special education out-of-district tuitions. It just so happens that a lot of time these things take years to happen, and then we get a bunch of students, either sometimes they move in, or sometimes we've been working on them for a year or longer, and then they go out of district. So those costs have risen this particular year. So it's been a little bit of a budget pressure for 2020, along with our health insurance. So we've had some significantly rising costs on our self-insured prescription plan. So one of the things I was tasked with was to help choose a new insurance broker. So we have our insurance broker, which helps shop our plans. So we have a new insurance broker that we hired effective November 1st. We are changing our prescription pharmacy benefit manager. Since it's a self-insured prescription plan, we're changing to CVS Caremark effective April 1st. We're in the process of rolling this out. We did a resolution at the last board meeting. They're actually the biggest pharmacy benefit manager right now. They're actually owned by Aetna, which is our medical insurance carrier currently. So that's been a drag on the budget this year, our health insurance costs year over year. The other, and pretty much, so we've also been spending the last couple years a little more on facilities. We're trying to do a much better job in making sure we're fixing things that break in the schools, and we're making a concerted effort to do more preventative maintenance. So we've been spending a little bit more on a line item that's a little under budgeted, so we transfer money into that budget line to make sure that we're fixing things. We have QSAC coming up, which is like the school audit. So the state comes in and audits the school district on 5 different categories. One of them is facilities. So there's like 100% checklist, and one of the things we have to do is make sure everything is measured up to that checklist. So we've been spending a little more money there this year. But it looks like our year-over-year expenses should hopefully only go up about 2.75%, which is a little better than it has been. We're expecting we're going to come fairly close to break even, and that's dependent on facilities expenditures. Non-referendum facilities, that's a capital cost. And we're implementing 2 very important a long-term planning study. Wasn't forecasted in the budget, and we're doing a thorough review of our special education program in the district too. So those are things that will help us to create a more sustainable academic environment and budget.
Can I ask something?
You can.
So, thank you. So the review of special ed was not in our budget? The review dollars?
Correct.
So actually, I'm surprised because it's been a goal, so I'm a little surprised about that.
It's not uncommon that from the budget takes hold of February, November, December really, right? So we really start in earnest January, February. So, quite often things are moved within the budget.
Well, no,
Like
the
you pointed out
special
earlier
ed-
this year about a school bus, and that you were right, and I told you were right, that school bus wasn't line by line in the budget. There was funds available within the transportation budget. So it's quite often the case in school districts will move funds from one line to another line for something that was not anticipated directly in the budget, but was, maybe a long-term priority, like you're referring to this special ed review.
It's been a 3-year goal, so I guess I'm surprised we didn't put some money away for it. I don't know. That surprises me. It would make sense to use the money that's for special ed, but I
It
don't
is
know.
coming
We
out,
don't
it's
do
being
that?
charged as a special ed line. It is being charged to a special ed, So one of the most important things about school district budgeting, not to get too geeky, here, I am a CPA by trade, is we want to charge everything to the appropriate line. So we move funds to the line, and then so we're able to track where we spend our money better over time.
Right. No, I guess, Steve, that wouldn't be the way you would do a goal to fund it?
But remember, we struck the budget in March, April of last year, redefined my goals in the summer and in the fall. So when we were looking at the budget, particularly with the time when we were having to make a reduction in staff, we sort of left that to see whether it was something that we could fund later.
But
So
special ed's been a 3-year goal.
it has.
Okay, so, okay. I just would think we would have been saving money for the end result, which was to do a review. I'm just asking.
And we also decided to go outside to do our review with a consulting firm versus the program reviews that we've typically done in-house.
So salaries, as I stated, year over year look to be relatively flat, slightly down from fiscal 19. As I already mentioned about the out-of-district tuitions, we talked about the charter school and how that tuition is calculated by the state and is affected by the weightings. So the weighting in fiscal 20 was a little higher on the side of having ELL free and reduced and or IEP students. That was what caused the 6% tuition increase year over year. We talked also about the self-insured costs, which hopefully will help stabilize the budget going forward. So now we're heavily focused on analyzing our 2021 budget. We build it salary by salary, and we estimate everything as close as we can get. We balance to, I talked about this before, our estimated actual revenues. So we know our tax levy at the top is what it can go up by, the 2%. And there's a small little $56,877 adjustment based on our increasing enrollment. To simplify that calculation is another one of the state calculations. They take a 6-year weighted average. So they take the most current 3 years, and compare it to the average of the previous 3 years over a 6-year period. And they do a weighting, and then it's over 1%, and you're allowed to pass on additional, based on those calculations, to have an additional tax levy above that 2%. The tuitions, we receive significant tuitions from our sending district. So we're receiving district here in Princeton for 9th through 12th graders from Cranberry. And that is going up a little bit. But basically what this tells us is that we're looking at a 2.1% revenue increase year over year. So that's putting a little pressure on balancing the 2021 budget. So like I just said, 2%, 2.1% year over year top side revenue growth. We have to balance to this revenue. So when we get later on, you'll see the introduced budget, and as we talk about it, you'll see it will look different because there's going to be budgeted fund balance. But like I said, we have to budget a balanced budget to what we're actually expecting to receive in revenue. So we're really focusing this year administratively on trying to tighten our non-salary costs. I mean, we're working on the benefit side, what we can control. So the majority of salaries in the school district are controlled by collective bargaining agreements. We have 3 collective bargaining agreements here in the district, which are the vast majority of our employees. So we're really focusing on some of that, what I'll call 16% of the non-salary benefit or charter school portion of the budget. We're going to focus on tightening controls, pushing back on how we spend our money. We can spend it most efficiently. Where can we get something cheaper? Do we need to do everything we do? Those are the kind of things we're really looking at. The last bullet I was talking about again was what's driving this year's budget issues are self-insured self-insured prescription costs. So one of the significant challenges I mentioned earlier this year is that there is no healthcare waiver, so we can't pass through anything above 2% this year in our healthcare costs. Our early projection, it's an early projection, we hope it will be better, is medical renewal at around 7%. We're going to heavily market that, so maybe we'll get some better numbers coming in.
When do we get those numbers?
Well, so that's a good question. So we could potentially get a number that if we liked, we could lock in before the budget, but insurance companies are, by their nature, risk-averse entities. So they base our year-to-year increase based on claims as they actually are paid. So the closer they get to the end of a year, so our renewal on our medical is July 1st, the closer they get, the more comfortable they are. So it's kind of a give and take. If we get a number we're comfortable with before the budget, our claims ratio is right around 84% right now for the trailing 12-month period. So it's not bad. But built into that number, there's taxes that they have to pay, and there's profit margin that the insurance companies, clearly it's a for-profit business. So,
Matt, would that be a single-year renewal or a multi-year?
Almost exclusively. We could always ask for a multi-year renewal. So quite often if we were to switch medical insurance companies, sometimes you can get a multi-year, but generally it's a single year, especially if we stay with the same carrier. Like I said, they're risk averse, so generally speaking, they won't give you a better rate going forward because there's less certainty.
Do you know what our loss ratio has been in years past?
Actually, I've analyzed, the last 4 years, our loss ratios have been, so we have a very overall stable group, which is great, very healthy. It's tracked up a little bit, slightly. It was in the lower 80s, and it's risen up slightly. Partially, you would argue, so there was a couple years where the premium wasn't increased. It's all a function of comparing the actual claims to the premiums collected. So, but I'm very pleased. 48 months of pretty stable claims. It was only, I think, over that time period, maybe 3 months that the claims paid were higher than the premiums. So it's a pretty stable group. So one of the options we have as a school district is potentially to go back into the state plan from time to time. So we're working on that as an overall strategy to make sure our plans are compatible with the states going forward.
Matt, the 7%, that's an increase year over year, right?
That's a year-over-year increase of 7%.
If I'm right, that translates to almost $1 million more in healthcare costs next year than we had this year. Is that right?
Yeah, some of the line items in the benefits, but on the medical itself it's not quite $1 million. But in that line item in the budget, there are other things that do go up past the 2%. So for our employees that are non-certificated, so non-teachers or certificated administrators, they pay into the state, the PERS, Public Employees Retirement System. So that typically has been about 10%. That's only about a $1.5 million line item. So there are other benefit amounts in that overall number. Workers' comp, actually it's a pool of insurance, which has been pretty good, but we've had some claims, so our claims adjustment factor looks like it may be a little higher, unfortunately, this year. So there are other line items in the benefits that do go up higher than the 2%.
Matt, is my recollection correct that last year we budgeted a 6% increase in healthcare, and then the actual amount came in later at 8%?
I believe it was actually, we budgeted a little lower. It might have been 6%, but we are a little short this year. When I say short, I mean we move funds within our budget to cover our benefits costs. We have to pay those. But yes, it was the broker had put out a little bit of a lower estimate last year. Then it came in higher. It was, I think, 7.7% when it was finally settled, but they had indicated potentially that it was going to be significantly lower than that. So it's a tricky part of the budget,
Yeah.
I have to say. So we're really going to work on reducing non-salary and benefit expenses. We hope through maximizing our budget efficiency, we can maintain expenditures in the classroom. That's our goal here, to maintain our classroom costs. We want the money to go to the kids. Facilities, though, is an area where we've gotten a lot of feedback. It's not uncommon in a district, a high-achieving district like this, that there's so much competition for dollars that they tend to go towards, over time, more fungible, things related to the children, so we don't think of the facility. So sometimes in high-achieving districts, I've seen this, that, over time periods, sometimes maybe the buildings have been slightly neglected. So, it's a strong word, maybe neglected, but, so we're really trying to reemphasize preventative maintenance, and, we're putting in new HVAC, so we want to make sure we maintain that and get the good return on our investment. So we're really trying to more accurately fund our facilities. We have a new facilities director. So that is a goal of the district in the coming budget years. So to that effect, we're looking at rolling out LED lighting, which is a very high return on the investment dollar. So we hear about energy savings plans, ESIPs, ESCOs, energy saving companies. But we're looking at hopefully doing more of a direct install plan where, we utilize companies that are already pre-approved through the program. So some of our schools fit that really well, where 80% of the cost is paid directly to the vendor from the program, and then we only have to pay the 20% remaining. So our elementary schools look like they fit into that program. So we get a really good bang for the buck on the LED lighting. So we retrofit the lights, we save a lot.
Can I ask a question?
You can ask a
And
question.
maybe Steve can weigh in on this. So when we planned the referendum in 2018,
Correct.
in parallel, there was supposed to be an ESIP, right?
Correct.
Where all this, and my understanding was that they would be done concurrently, because some of these things you have to open walls, and we wouldn't want to do the work twice. So what is the status of the ESIP? And it looks like we've gotten away from it. Why is that?
I'm going to turn to Brian. Has this come up in conversations with facilities, with the architect? Because I know that this was something that we were focused on, and we had a report done. There was a wide range of ESIP projects that we could implement, with the LED lighting being one of the first, but we also wanted to be really careful about how we did it, because sometimes there are companies that can come in and try and do it for you, but then they reap the benefits of that. So we did want to try and do it in-house. So I'm not sure if there's feedback that you want to provide.
Last January, when I landed on the board, they were not running concurrently, and the programs were never discussed in a robust manner at the facilities committee, other than the desire to take steps to operate more efficiently. One of the challenges apparently is the fact that there has to be a high level of expertise in your own staff to do some of the things, and there are a large number of measurements that have to be made to qualify for some of the programs. But I think that recently we've been told by Matt and Dave that they're exploring a number of programs, and hope to have a path forward, whether it's ESIP or some other program. And Dave has used other programs that he has found to be better and more appropriate than ESIP. So hopefully sometime in the next 90 days, once you guys get done with the budget and CUSAC, we maybe be able to talk about that a bit more.
We're going to be talking about it at the next facilities meeting. So two things we've had. We had the local government energy, the LGEA, the energy audit. So we have a comprehensive audit already done. We had the consultant come out and explain to us some of the top level things. Dave had a consultant pro bono write up
and
a
that's wonderful, but
overview of.
But I'm trying to understand, when we planned this referendum, certain projects were put into the ESIP with the understanding that they would happen concurrently. And so I relied on the professional advice of our professionals. And so I don't understand, or what changed that this ESIP that we had planned, and I remember sitting in meetings that we're going to put that in the ESIP, we're going to put that in the ESIP, didn't come to fruition. And that's not what was represented to the public. And you weren't here, so I'm
but
not.
I do understand ESIPs. I've been through an ESIP. So one of the things about ESIPs, as Steve just mentioned earlier, is that a large percentage of those savings goes to the companies and professionals that perform them. And as you guys will see in facilities, so the analysis, which I completely concur with the consultant that wrote this up, and he describes each of the different plans of doing that. So the when you do it outside of the ESIP, it's much more efficient. You're actually able to reap the financial dollars. So the ESIP is designed for a school district that has the inability to pass a referendum. So it's a process where the funding mechanism, it's supposed to break even. So they do a lot of capital improvements. Like if we were going to go out and replace our boilers, so there's a very low return. And you look at the LGEA, you'll see that. So the high return items are LEDs. Some of them are 68 years. Some of them are 96 years. So the high returns are on LEDs and on the building level controls, which that's our target right now.
So I'm trying to understand, did our professional give us incomplete advice? Because we were not told that ESIPs were something districts did without a referendum. I'm just trying to understand, because people voted for this referendum with the understanding that some of these projects were going to be funded another way, myself included. And so I'm trying to understand, you're saying it's not cost effective. Well, why did we learn this after the fact? Because that's not what the conversation was.
I wasn't there, so I hesitate
No, I'm asking Steve.
We do rely on our professionals, so we had conversation with the ESIP providers and our architects, and then, as you know, we've transitioned to a new director of facilities who has experience in this area with sustainable practices and implementation, and so we're taking a look at it anew with the hope of being able to recoup more money for the district.
If I could just take one more stab at describing to you how it works. So essentially you take the very low return items or high return items, the things that take shorter payback periods like LED lighting, and you use those cost savings to help fund some of the higher payback items, which can be like 50, 60 years on boilers. They just don't pay for themselves. They are more energy efficient. So you take those savings and then you fund a non-referendum debt. So then you don't get the money back. It's a note, and you're able to self-fund. So you basically financially break even, and you're allowed to pay for, let's say, boilers, like I said, the higher payback items from the savings from the LEDs. But our plan, so right now we're going to focus on those very low payback items. LED lighting is 2 years, 2-point-something years of payback. So the small piece we're going to have to pay out of pocket, we can do like a 5-year note, and we'll still be positive when you factor in the energy savings on top of the rebates. So I think it's a real good plan going forward. So I don't think there was any misinformation. There's all sorts of different. There's literally, you'll see, well, you won't see, but the facilities committee will see on the 18th that there are literally like 5 or 6 competing different types of plans. But the ESIP is really designed for those districts that do have a difficult time passing referendums. It's a funding mechanism outside of the referendum process. I hope I more clearly have explained that.
My question was directed to Steve, but that's not what we were told by our professionals, and that's my concern. So I understand what an ESIP is. I spent nearly 2 years on the referendum planning process, and that's not how it was explained to me, so I'm trying to understand. That's also what I represented, to the community. So what I'm trying to understand is where the disconnect, and we can discuss this further offline.
Okay, awesome. So one of the things that we really try to work on is revising our budgeting and financial tracking systems and controls to help ensure that the funds that we spend are efficiently spent. We're utilizing, one of the last things we're implementing for the coming budget is to help leverage our spending on required technology costs. So we're going to use very low interest capital leasing. Most school districts do this, so you could kind of flat fund your year-over-year technology investments. So you pay for them with extremely low interest. We should be able to get like 1.2% about there. We actually have to bid out the rates through financing companies. There's about 3 financing companies that are very active in this market. So we'll be able to leverage the money so we could spend about $400 and something thousand and pay back $100,000 over a few years, so we can build out the technology infrastructure as needed. Our technology team is working on a long-term technology plan so we can plan accurately. It's a great area to flat fund your budget because over time the costs of technology go down for the same thing, so we should be able to hopefully continuously meet our rising technology demands for a school district going into we're in the 21st century, so it's very important to be able to invest efficiently there. So that kind of concludes, our top level, first look into where we are financially, where we look to be, and then we're working very hard right now to balance the 2021 budget with the constraints that we have. I think that was it. The last slide was, again, most importantly, or very importantly, budget-related question and answers from the community.
Can we do the board first? I guess?
Sure. We can do the board first.
There are board members who'd like to ask any questions. Jess?
Just on the technology piece where you ended, is that plan, the capital lease structure, is that different from what we've done in the past?
We have not implemented that here. We've been, in some ways, fortunate enough to kind of pay as you go. But one of the important things, as we can see with our top-level revenue constraints, is to be able to flat fund as best we can those expenses that we know, the recurring, once again, to talk about recurring expenses, we have those kind of recurring expenses that aren't salaries or benefits that we can utilize. So it's a short-term help, after the first few years. Like I said, it becomes flat funded, so it has short-term benefits.
Michelle?
Thank you, Matt. That was a really great presentation. I appreciate it. So my question is, we're kind of at a high level, and I understand that, but one of the things that, one of the statements that Steve led with was about a budget being a statement of values. And our primary overarching value has been one of ensuring equity for all of our students. Where would I be able to see, and maybe I'm at too high a level to see that right now, but going forward, where are we going to see how equity or our efforts at achieving equity in the school district are impacted by this budget? How do we know we're putting our money where our mouth is?
That's a very good question. I can speak to what I've seen so far here, kind of compared to my recent experience in school districts. So we have family liaisons at the buildings, which are very progressive for a school district like this to have. So we are a community, that's diverse and rich, but we were able to spend money on those types of things. We're working on some repurposing, possibly, of current employees. So we're focusing on trying to do things that are budget neutral, in the line of priority-based budgeting, shifting resources maybe towards, like you're asking about, equity programs.
So we're engaged in those discussions with that as our driving value. And as Matt indicated a lot of them are around personnel. Some are professional development, and we're continuing to focus in that area with training for teachers in culturally responsive education and restorative practice. If you're talking about the family liaisons, for example, we went from a full-time liaison at the middle school to 3/5 person, 3 days a week that we shared then with the Y, that cost, which was an economically viable alternative, but we would like to go back to a full-time position there. It's a question of, we have to look and see how we can afford that. So we are in discussions at the administrative level about where we're going to find the funding, what positions we can move around to make sure that we can provide that. But that's what I look forward to bringing to the board in a few weeks, is some of those personnel decisions that will be driven by our value and focus on equity.
I wanted to say that in light of what transpired last night at the Equity Committee meeting, just a observation that equity is not always around people's financial condition or socioeconomic status. It is also people who are not economically disadvantaged suffer from inequitable treatment in our schools as well. From people who are special ed students, LGBTQ students. So I just want to make sure that we don't get into a habit of characterizing all of our equity efforts around a deficiency or that, wow, all of our efforts are going to be around low-income
Not
issues.
at all.
And
Yeah.
because it's not. It's overt examples of discrimination and disparate treatment in our schools. And while we can move people around, we tend to move them in pieces. And I want to make sure that as we think about this, if we're going to keep equity at the forefront, that there's some way that I can see in this budget that is indeed what's happening.
Can I speak to that briefly? And Michelle, to answer your question very hyper-specifically, I think at this 30,000-foot view, we are a little too high to see that at this point, but we are having those ongoing conversations, as Steve said. And as we get specifically into the personnel aspect of it, what Matt has really done here, and I think everybody here should also tell him to stop working on Saturdays and Sundays, just like Steve told me to stop writing emails while I'm jogging on the treadmill at 4 a.m. But we certainly do appreciate your work there, Matt. But those conversations around equity, all kinds of equity that you said are taking place right now. Matt has set the ceiling and has said, here's what we have. Now it's our time to have that conversation that within that ceiling, what is it that we value? And we have been having those conversations, but now we have a realistic starting point for Matt that we can't say we want all of this because it's going to blow Matt's presentation out of the water. So we're having those conversations. It's just a little high right now, to be specific.
No, I understand that. And I'm part of some of those conversations. I just wanted to reiterate that point before you started
Understood.
putting numbers into lines.
And Steve, do you want to just comment briefly? We talked earlier today about the process. I think this board and past boards have always felt that, sometimes things come to us and it's a done deal, and we don't have the opportunity to ask kind of the mission-driven questions that are really the most important to
Right.
us. And I think we talked that this year we're hoping to have another crack at this. And
Yeah, I think that what we would like to be able to do is to bring to the board early on some of the thinking around the movement of personnel to really achieve all of the objectives that you've laid out, that we've all laid out in terms of our focus on equity and achievement for all of our students. So we do have ideas, as Mike indicated. We're having those conversations. It's been focused with our administrative team. And so the next step would be able to bring some of that conversation to the board so that you can weigh in and help us see competing priorities sometimes. Because if you're going to move in one direction, you may have to pull back on something else. And I want the board to understand what those priorities are and help decide them.
Along those lines, the public has also asked us as board members at what point they'll see this information as well, to be able to weigh in either at meetings or via email about what's important to them and to their schools. So I'm wondering, is that approximately March, right? You're sort of thinking of getting us this overview, less of an overview, but more of sort of detail of what we're thinking about changing for this year's budget? That will
Correct.
come to the board, but in a public meeting?
Not right away in a public
Okay.
meeting. We're talking about positions and people.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so we have to be sensitive in terms of how we have those conversations, where and when we have those conversations. And
And
so
s-
some of it may happen in personnel, some of it may happen initially in closed session
Mhm.
as we make decisions, and then we can be more
Great.
forthcoming once we're moving forward.
So then the March 17th budget session, just to be able to share with the public, is that a time that the public will, at what point can the public weigh in on some of these things? Obviously, some things,
The public can always weigh in
Okay.
on what they see as priorities and what they would like us to be considering. But by March 17th, yes, for that session, we should have a fairly definitive draft. Yeah.
Steve, I just wonder, at this point, could you just maybe reiterate the upcoming opportunity on the challenge success session and the sharing of information about where we are with the data that we get from that
Sure.
analysis? Because I think, while I think as a board, we want to be really clear about our commitment to equity, I think sort of what I've come to see in my time on the board as kind of the two hands of this equation are it's equity and student well-being. And I think that if we, as we've talked about them, they're not competing
Not at all.
priorities. They're
They go-
actually really hand in hand. And so I just think that information as a part of, I also really appreciate the emphasis on looking at our budget in terms of services and thinking about,
What's working.
yeah, and
for our
so
kids.
if those are our priorities, what are the services that need to be in place in order
So
to
the
support them?
challenge success survey was given, as the board knows, in December. We got those results back recently, and that's gives us data on school engagement. And so we are looking forward to having a meeting on the March 23rd, Monday, March 23rd. There's going to be a consultant from Challenge Success organization from Stanford who will be coming and working with our faculty in the afternoon on talking about the data and looking at the results in terms of the amount of sleep, the amount of homework, the amount of stress, and strategies that we can employ to increase wellness for our kids. And then in the evening, that same consultant is going to be offering an opportunity to talk to parents and community members. I think that's going to be run from 6:30 to 8 o'clock at the PAC, I believe. John Kleiman is the representative from Challenge Success, and that's going to be focused particularly on what parents can be doing and helping with their kids. So there's data that the students have provided about parental expectations, et cetera.
Can you just back up for some of the new parents new to the district, what Challenge Success is, why we did it, what we hope to gain from
Challenge
it?
Success is an organization out of Stanford University Graduate School of Education that does that, just that. It looks at challenging the notion of success and whether that's getting good grades, getting into a good college, or whether it's something more, as we've defined here in Princeton, in terms of leading lives of joy and purpose. And it focuses on high level of engagement in school, meaningful engagement, but also that sense of joy, purpose, and wellness for kids. And so they have this survey looks at like 9 different factors of school engagement and gives us feedback on the students' levels of stress, the amount of homework, the amount of sleep. It breaks it out by gender, by grade level, and gives us very specific feedback about what our kids are telling us their experience is. And in the past, we've heard from our kids that they are doing school. They're showing up, they're intellectually engaged, but they're not as affectively engaged in their courses during the day as they are with their activities after school. And so a lot of the changes that we have made at the high school in the past year and a half have been designed to heighten that level of engagement. And what's nice about the Challenge Success model is that they have research-based strategies that help with that engagement and that wellness. Some of them are around the use of time. And so the later start time and longer blocks of time in the school day at the high school is a direct result of our work with Challenge Success. I can tell you that our kids are getting a bit more sleep and having a little less homework than they had the last time they took the survey. At least that's what they're reporting to us. But when we have a board that has a value placed on wellness and balance for our kids, and we have a board that's focused on making data-based decisions, the Challenge Success Survey really gives us the data and the voices of our students, and it allows us to make really informed decisions about the direction for the district. So I think it's nice that we're also providing that focus for families, for parents to be able to think as well about the time that kids are at home and the decisions that are made in the home that affect the wellness of our kids and their engagement in school.
So again, that's March 23rd,
March
right?
23rd,
6:30 for parents. And also, if parents or community members are interested in learning more about the Challenge Success, there's there's all sorts of resources available on a website, and you can just Google.
ChallengeSuccess.org.
Right. And it has the SPACE, S-P-A-C-E, the SPACE approach. I think that has informed this board and previous boards, and I think it's very interesting if you want to look that up.
So, Matt, I thought that was a great presentation, very thorough, too. One way that we didn't sort of slice the numbers was what the state does, which is in classroom versus out of classroom. And I think that about 60% of our budget goes to in classroom and about 40% outside the classroom. And I felt last year our budget disproportionately impacted with the layoffs, the people in the classroom. And this was an equity issue and a learning issue. And I would like the board to think about setting parameters for the budgeting process and prioritizing, the classroom staff, because it's teachers who teach, and to make sure that doesn't happen again.
Yes, I think that's a priority of this board. It's a priority of central administration and the community.
The second part of that is that we are adding 3 new classrooms, which will be ready for occupancy hopefully in September, and then 4 a year later. And so I just want to make sure that those 3 classrooms have teachers, and to build new facilities, new classrooms, and not be able to afford teachers to teach in them seems to me a self-defeating process. So I think that should be top of our priority list as well.
So we're looking carefully at the enrollment projections across the district. And as you point out at the middle school, we're seeing the greatest growth for next year with an increase of about 10%, 70 students, so from 780 to about 850. And that growth continues to go up over the next few years. So we are looking at the middle school to add teachers. As we've said before, if it needs to be budget neutral, and we're still waiting for a few more numbers to see how many more positions we can add to the budget, or whether we need to realign in some way, but we are focused on that.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Peter? Yeah. No other comments? I want to just comment, we're being recorded today, right? This is recorded?
It is.
It'll be posted on the website for others in the next day or two?
Yes.
Okay, I think it's important. Obviously, this isn't a simulcast tonight. We're not live streaming.
We're not streaming tonight, but it is being
Thank you.
recorded for posting later.
Thank you. And I also want to thank you, Matt. One of our district goals this year is on doing long-term financial planning to bring this district into a financially sustainable position, and I think you've gone a long way towards at least helping us have the vocabulary to talk about these issues and have the facts before us, and it's just so powerful and helpful, and I think we're all really grateful to you for the work and the weekends that you put into this, so thank you. And
Thank you.
and I think the ability of the community to go through and spend time with this presentation. Obviously, there's a lot of numbers there, a lot of information. I'm sure people will have additional questions. I guess my question is, how does the public kind of come to us with their questions on the budget? Because I know that last year we tried to put together some FAQs, and I'm sure we can do the same this year. So if there's some things that are of particular interest, we hopefully can address them. Is there a place that people should send their questions, or just to board members, or, we can certainly pass them on. Any suggestions?
I'll take any and all emails. So I'm on the website. Matthew Bolden at PrincetonK12.org.
Or any of the board members. I
of the
think
board, yeah.
we will all pass them on. But I think we're all in the process of gaining deeper knowledge on school finance and the details and under the hood. And so as you have questions, please pass them on to us, and we will try to address them in a way that is a FAQ or some other way that kind of put it on our website so we all can continue to get deeper in the numbers. So thank you for that. Now I think, are we ready for questions, public questions? So if you have a question, you can approach the podium. We ask that you keep it to 3 minutes. State your name and your address. And this is not a Q&A with the board. We will listen and take notice of your comments. Thank you. And Michelle will be. She's a tough timekeeper, so I just warn you in advance.
Do I need to push anything?
No, I think you're on.
Good evening. My name is Judy Cutton. I live at 16 Magnolia Lane, and I am here representing the PHS Fencing Boosters. Along with me tonight, please raise your hands, my Fencing Booster Club. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome
Thank
to
you.
Fencing.
We presented at last meeting to the student achievement, and it was suggested that we come here and actually present some actual numbers to share with you tonight. So just a very quick overview. We became an official team in 2014. And since then, we have grown significantly. As a booster club, we have provided in-kind donations over the years of approximately $7,000 a year of equipment. And that equipment goes to help any student be a part of our team. We are a no-cut team and a co-ed team. And when I say no-cut, anybody can show up, regardless of background, experience, knowledge, whatever if you like the idea of fencing, come and join our team. And currently, we have 70 cleared students.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a very big team. Some of them are at the club level, others are competitive. But again, they all fence together, and it's a really cohesive group. Currently, we have, I believe it's between 10 and 12 students of that 70 that are borrowing our equipment and using it. So that's a significant percentage, and we welcome, and we have taken an inventory. We have a large inventory, and again, anybody who wants can be a part of it. Also, this is anecdotal. I don't have the exact numbers, but we have every year between 4 and 8 IEP students that are actively participating in the fencing team. So it is, again, not restricted to any one group or special interest group. Specifically, we are coming to ask for a few enhancements to our program. Currently, we only have one coach, and that's for 70 students, and he's primarily a boys team coach. Our first big ask is for a second coach. Do you want me to say numbers? Or looking at comparable teams that have comparable sizes, practice schedules, and length of season, a full coach would be looking at a little over $10,000 a year. And what are you comparing that to? We have the data from 2018, and looking at wrestling team and other sports that are comparable, like I said, participation.
At Princeton High School.
At Princeton High School, yes, absolutely. Comparable size teams, length of season, et cetera. The second thing we're looking for is parity for our primary coach. Currently, he is making significantly less than other coaches of the similar composition. And in order to get him up to parity would be approximately $4,000. And in addition, we mentioned the materials that we have. Over the years, we, the boosters, have provided these fencing strips. This is what the fencers specifically actually compete on. We currently have 2, and in order to host competitions sufficiently, we need 2 more. Okay. Those each cost $4,000. So that would be a total of $8,000. Again, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
Judy.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
Hi, good evening. My name is Julie Julie Cho. I'm at 74 Robert Road, and I'm here speaking on behalf of Special Education PTO. I've heard some wonderful thoughts about equity and wellness, and I just want to take a moment to kind of reframe in this community to kind of set the stage for what special education is in the district and how it actually helps so many more students than is realized. We've heard numbers that maybe up to 1 in 5 students in the district tap into the resources of special education, whether through IEPs or 504s, or even just intermittent service. Someone has an event in their life and needs to access the psychologist for 2 months, that person is there. So one example, often families think of special education as the students who are in the self-contained classrooms. Well, there are many students in the district who access services who are not in those classrooms. We have students with anxiety, depression, ADHD, other health impairments, visual, hearing, motor, all kinds of challenges. And in this town, one of the things that makes it so exemplary to live in is that we all seem to embrace diversity of every kind. And sometimes those diversities bring needs, and those need to be supported, and that's not always free. So I would love the community to open their mind a little more broadly about the students who actually receive benefits from this group of professionals that goes beyond the students who are obviously using those resources. There have been some comments in the community about over-delivering special ed services, but when you think of the district goals of equity and supporting every child together, as I mentioned, if you have a student who isn't even necessarily classified, you have this wonderful staff available to you to support your children in all these variety of ways. One example might be at Riverside, the child study team members, even though it's beyond IEP students, were charged with teaching an exec functioning seminar to the 5th graders so that they are prepared to more successfully go on to the middle school. So oftentimes we talk about how things that are helpful for special ed students are actually really helpful for all students. So when you look at the line items for special ed and want to complain that it's expensive or growing, aside from the out-of-district placements, we need to be more open about thinking who is accessing these services and how it's helping the broader group of students. One other thing, if I do have a minute, is I did want to come and advocate and let you know that our families very much value the instructional assistance. I think there was some fear that with the new negotiation that the stipend language kind of needed to be clarified. I have heard that if it is employed to the letter of the language, that it has already caused some divisiveness among the staff. An example would be a person who gets a stipend for performing a duty, may be absent for a week, wants to ask a colleague to cover for them, and they're not inclined to because they don't receive the stipend. So to support equity for all students who do have aides, we'd love for the negotiating committee to consider revamping the language or even removing the stipend language and using a better measure that is more aligned with the purpose and goals of the aides, such as assignments made by best fit to make the student's experience and outcome better rather than.
You wrap it up, but we appreciate your comments and we do
Okay,
hear you.
okay,
Thank you
sorry.
very
So then
much.
I can take that up at another time.
And you
Or
can write to
feel
us.
free to write. You
Yes.
can absolutely feel free to write.
Okay,
We would love
okay.
to hear it.
Okay.
And that would actually be really helpful if you
Okay.
could
Yeah.
write.
Thank
So
you very much. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Julie.
Hi, Mary Clerman, Harris Road. This is a very interesting meeting, and it's very dense, the information that Matt's given. And in the interest of public knowledge and understanding and to facilitate the whole process of educating the public, I'd like to suggest that you actually do live stream these meetings, anything like this. And I understand also that some board meetings have not been able to be live streamed. I don't know what the technical reasons are, but I think it's really very, very valuable and should be done at whatever possibility level there is. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we know, because I remember a year ago, or 18 months ago, we would live stream every meeting. So what's changed that we're not doing that?
We've been having some technical difficulties because what happens is that the software updates and we don't know about it. So we are working on it that for the next meeting in 2 weeks, we're going to fix that.
Okay, because just so you know, there's some conspiracy theories out there.
I understand
just
about the
wanted to-
conspiracy
yes,
theories,
okay.
but the problem is we are recording it and that's, we're doing the best we can with what we have. Okay? Taking care of it.
Thank you, Kurt.
Thank you.
Rod Montgomery from William Patterson Court, curmudgeon taxpayer, as always speaking in what the positive psychologist people term the active destructive mode from a position of hopeful pessimism. I have 2 points which I will try to make brief. Superintendent Cochran referred to challenge success. As always, there is a book. The title is Overloaded and Underprepared. The authors are Denise Pope, with whom I believe you have been working.
Yes.
And 2 others. I don't know whether there's a copy in the Princeton Public Library. There needs to be, and if there is not, I will try to get one there. I commend it to all interested in challenge success. For my second point, I would like to take some issue with Board Member Dart's comments a few minutes ago, in which he seemed to indicate that rooms without a teacher assigned to each are not useful.
Well, perhaps less useful, but
I offer a contrary viewpoint. One of the purposes of high school in the 21st century must, not should, but must be to help students learn how to continue learning after they leave high school. If your high school, our high school, prepares them only to learn under the intense supervision and stimulation, I won't say torment or goading, although I reserve the right to think those words. If that's the only way they learn to learn, then if by some circumstance in their life after high school, they lack access, whether for economic or for reasons of conflicting obligations, to that mode of learning, what will they do? They'll be stuck, prey for every shyster online supposed course vendor that's out there. They need to get some practice under competent supervision, learning how they can learn, learning how to use online resources, and how to help each other learn. So I respectfully suggest that the high school needs some space that is not constantly supervised by teachers, in which students can learn how to learn. Thank you for your attention.
Thank
Sorry
you.
I ran over. Thank you for your
Thank you,
hard
Mr.
work for
Bonpland.
Princeton students.
thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further comments? Yes.
Hi, Corinne Ryan Brennan, 291 Dodds Lane. Last year at the April budget, I stood before you and asked that you seek alternatives to cutting the AIS resources within our districts. Although my husband and I are private people, I publicly spoke about the wonderful impact of the AIS program on my daughter. Tonight, as you plan for next year's budget, I'm asking you to revisit the AIS program and the resources aligned with it. as I firmly believe that the decrease in resources has negatively impacted some of our most vulnerable children and our district as a whole. I can only speak for my daughter, but I know I'm not alone. Due to the change in criteria, my daughter was not eligible for AIS Language Arts this year. She was identified as being eligible for AIS math support. However, the AIS resources have already been stretched so thin. My understanding was that the iReady math curriculum was to be used to evaluate children at the beginning of the year. Unfortunately, it wasn't rolled out, initially. Unfortunately, iReady was not implemented until several weeks into the school year, and children identified for AIS math support were left not receiving extra assistance that they needed. Over the past 5 months, my daughter has continued to struggle in math and again in language arts. She is now going into school 3 times a week at 8 a.m. to receive extra assistance. This extra assistance is not AIS, but it is through the support of a wonderful grant. But as you know, a grant is not guaranteed year to year. She is being asked to get up early because the assistance she needs to try to keep up with her peers is no longer available to her during the school day. My biggest fear last year, when AIS resources were cut, was that some of our most vulnerable children, the ones who desperately need this extra help, would fall through the cracks. I don't want this to happen to my child or to any child. I respectfully ask that you reconsider creative ways in which you can bring more AIS resources back into our schools. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
If I can just say something about what Corinne just said. Oh, no, I want to say it's about, is
Okay.
my comment, are we limited to speaking?
I think.
Wait, but I just wanted to add something to that. When we talk about equity, there's something not, from personal experience, there's something not equitable when a child doesn't get what they need during the school day. A child who's struggling goes through the school day, and it's hard enough. And now kids like Corinne's have to go even more just to keep up. And I just think when we talk about equity, that's another thing we need to consider.
Is there anyone else who wants to public comment? If there's no further public comment, is there anything else that Matt? I was given a very light agenda tonight. Are we ready to?
We're ready
Can I
to
have
move.
It's 9:03. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
Thank you all for coming.
Brian, second Dan. Adjourned.
All in favor?
Thank you.